I've got a lot of this garbage, huh? Hey, what's poppin', players? I'm a Sega collector. I call myself that because I've been collecting Sega and Sonic the Hedgehog merchandise for almost my whole life. A lot of my hardware, software, and collectibles were passed down to me by family. And because of that, I have a lot of vintage and very rare Sega-related merchandise not many people know about. So it's my job to talk about it. From video game spotlights, to retrospectives, and of course, reviews on figures and plushes, you can find it all here. So enough talking, let's get the ball rolling. Welcome to the Sega Collector. Let me tell you something, folks. If you've been collecting for as long as I have, you've seen a lot of Sonic figures. You've seen the good, you've seen the bad, you've probably spent too much money on some, but most importantly, you've definitely seen an array of many different styles and types. Small figures, big figures, obnoxiously big figures. Sonic's been around for like 30-something years, but in all that time, there's only been a handful of bendable Sonic figures. What's a bendable figure, you may ask? Well, as opposed to plastic or vinyl, a bendable figure is usually made of a rubber-type material with bendable wires inside, allowing you to pose the limbs in any position. So why does this matter? You might also be asking that. Well, a lot of fans and collectors argue that Sonic has a design that doesn't lend itself to superposable figures. Because Sonic figures have such thin and noodle-like arms and legs, when you try and put too many joints on a figure, they end up looking really buff and distracting, like on the Jazzwares Sonic figures. But if you don't put many joints on there at all, you end up with something like, say, the Tomy Sonic figures, which could potentially look good, but couldn't pose a whole lot. A bendable figure is a great way to try and get a very specific kind of pose. The problem, though, is they break very easily. They have metal wires on the inside, and if you bend them too much, those wires snap, and your figure is basically useless. Because of that, not many companies have decided to take the risk with bendable Sonic figures. But there are a select few, which are very rare and highly sought after. So hey, why don't we cover a few of them? But first, you know the drill. If you like this video so far and want to see other Sega and Sonic goodness, you gotta hit that subscribe button to keep up to date. Also, if you're really vibing with this, click that like button too, because that shows me that this is the type of content you like, which helps me make more of it. Alright, let's get rolling. Back to the 90s, when Sonic ruled the world. There are two bendable Sonic figures from this era, but both are kinda hard to find the specific release date or year for them. Alright, now typically I only like to talk about items that I own in my collection, but since this is a retrospective, I gotta be accurate. One of the first bendable Sonic figures ever made comes from the land down under, Sydney, Australia. It was exclusive to a Sega park at the time called Sega World, and could be found in gift shops. So when Sega World was, demolished in the early 2000s, you can probably guess that a lot of those park exclusive figures and plushes became incredibly rare and really wanted. And you'd be correct. I only own one piece of Sega World history, and it's this Sonic backpack plush. But they also made bendable figures of Sonic, Sally, and Robotnik. Hey, fun fact, I've literally never seen the Sonic for sale. It seems anyone who has one got it through trading a collector or something, I don't know. But this figure, sorry to let you down, I don't have, but he deserves to be mentioned. Aside from his massive hands, he's a pretty accurate old school Sonic, and certainly has a lot of charm. But let's switch our attention to a figure I do own, also released in the late 90s. Check out this ugly little guy. Shockingly made by Tomy. Yep, Tomy made Sonic figures before their Sonic Boom range. This is a large bendable figure, close to 7 inches tall, and he's a heavy one too. He's also super off-model. Notice his tiny little body, and super long legs, his ginormous eyes, and his square pupil shines? Super weird. Ooh, speaking of weird, his spikes! Short, stubby, and by no means sharp. This is one funky looking bendy Sonic. If you want this guy, you're looking in the price range of $60 to $100 probably. Now we're gonna launch ourselves straight to the early 2000s with Toy Island's Sonic Adventure bendable figures. Re-released as the Sonic X bendable figures, these were tiny little guys that were almost impossible to find. Poor distribution. I happen to own a seldom seen version of these figures released in China, or Japan, or Korea, I don't know, one of them. Sonic here is looking a little short and stubby. Noticeably, he is a really dark blue, but his green eyes are ever present. Oddly, his shoe detailing is a little bare. The soles of his shoes are white instead of gray and lack a lot of detail. Oh, on the topic of detail, look at the way they sculpted his spikes. They really curve downward and are a separate mold from the rest of the head. He is also constantly T-posing with arms and legs, hands and feet all positioned outward. Super bizarre. These are also not the greatest quality. He certainly bends, but he doesn't stay in any poses. This guy isn't too rare since he was released a few times. Maybe $10 to $30? He's a chubby little guy, but considering the era he comes from, he reminds me of the model of Sonic used in Sonic Adventure on the Sega Dreamcast. And speaking of the adventure games, we're gonna move on to Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, you know, God. Toy company Joyride, in part with GamePro magazine, made a small collection of video game related figures, all of which depict the characters from very specific games. Notice how their Mario has the rolled up sleeves from Mario Sunshine, how their Luigi looks terrified from Luigi's Mansion, and how their god tier Sonic rocks the soap shoes from Sonic Adventure 2. Another tall figure, maybe 6 inches tall or so, this Sonic is one of the greatest figures of the character ever made. And I'm not just saying that because of the shoes. All of his proportions are directly based on Sonic Adventure era artwork and look amazing. His body is the right size with well-detailed fists, his nose curves up and sticks out, he has that signature side smirk, and his spikes are sharp, pointy, and modeled excellently. This is a totally on-model Sonic figure, and the fact he has the soap shoes, which are super detailed even on the bottom, makes it a favorite among collectors. It's also a highly desired figure, not because of how great he is, and no, not just because the shoes, but because he was not easy to get back when he released. This is one expensive little hedgehog, costing at least maybe $70 in poor condition, but easily $100 and up for a good condition. And in the box, whew! Save up your money, friends. As we reach the end of the 2000s, it should be noted one more bendable Sonic figure exists, although was never released. In fact, your boy has it right here. I'm the only person to actually own this. A prototype of a figure, supposed to have been released in 2008. He looks a lot like the Toy Island one. Because he is. Jazzwares borrowed the mold and made their own production run, which sadly never got released. But take a look at the paint difference in quality between the Toy Island and the Jazzwares Bendy Sonic. A very interesting grail in my collection for sure. As for value, well, he's unreleased, so I suppose he's worth as much as you're willing to spend. Me personally, I got him dirt cheap. After that though, no bendable Sonic figures were made for more than a decade, until our friend Jakks Pacific rolled around in the spring of 2019 with bendable Sonic figures. Note how Jakks started their range with bendies, but then phased them out for articulated figures. Probably because of how easy they were to break. Their bendy Sonic is no different than their 4-inch articulated Sonic, it's the same mold with some minor differences. That being said, I like the bendy more. Simply because Sonic is always depicted doing these crazy, over-the-top poses that a bendable figure can pull off much easier than an articulated one. He's a young stunner, and as of this video is not worth a whole lot, but give it a few years. I'm sure he'll cost you an arm and a leg someday. In terms of style, he does look a lot like the Sonic seen in the games, which also makes him super accurate. The Joyride Sonic is based on artwork, the Jakks Sonic based on in-game models, and they both excel at what they try to achieve. Now, as I said earlier, I only like to talk about items I physically own, but another bendable Sonic figure just came out in the winter of 2022. And truth be told, I had like 4 opportunities to pick this thing up, and each time, I chose not to. Because he has to be one of the worst Sonic figures I think I've ever seen in my entire life. I know that old 90s one looks really weird, but we live in an age where toy companies can just get the 3D model of Sonic, 3D print it, and make molds for their figures. That's why Jakks' Sonic stuff is so accurate. Technology is advanced. And yet, with the advent of this new technology, this toy company actively chooses to ignore it and makes one of the stupidest Sonics I've ever seen. From the front, it's almost okay. From the side, he's as flat as cardboard. Low effort, bad material, just not something I want in the collection. But it's a retrospective, so I have to at least mention it. And that about wraps up our little history tour on bendable Sonic the Hedgehog figures. What a wonderful ride it's been. We've learned so much. Hey, do you own any of these Sonic Bendable figures in your collection? Is there one in particular that you'd like to own? Tell me in the comments, I'm all ears. I hope you've enjoyed this look back, and I hope to see you all again in the next video. But until then, I'll catch you on the flip side.